Today we'll take a look at creating worlds in Esenthel game engine. First, we'd like to go to our resources folder, new and world. Here you can choose an area size and type map resolution. By default they're 64 and 64. Areas with smaller sizes are intended for games with more detailed worlds, and larger areas are intended for games with a larger view range and small amount of details. Sorry that it's not in English, but I will translate everything for you. Press OK and we open our world. Here we can see our camera. It moves the same way as in our model editor, and we see some familiar controls like this cube, which allows us to rotate in set angles. Here you can also see a slider, which you can also change by scrolling. It controls camera speed. The higher the value, the higher the camera precision. So with a high value, your camera moves very slowly, and with lower values, it moves a lot faster. I'm moving the camera with WASD, and you can also speed it up with a shift. Here I'm moving without shift, and here with it. You can also change camera mode. Currently I am in first person mode, and if you press here, it will be a spherical camera. So when you rotate, it rotates in a sphere around a focal point. We have the same square, which allows us to access some preset cameras, reset camera, and center on object. We currently don't have any objects, but it's here. The controls are the same as in model editor. We also have an option to draw or not draw the world grid, and we have some options for drawing. For example, we can draw object points, boxes. We'll see all this when we add some objects to our map. Here you can also see the visible radius. It's shown with this square around the camera. It's just how much from the camera the world renders in the editor. The play button allows you to play the world, but honestly, I haven't found much use for it, but it's there if you need. Let's start with creating terrain. Press on the terrain tab. Here we can import a terrain or add it ourselves. The first thing we need to do is to add the material. This will be our base terrain material, and we will paint with other materials on top of it. We already have some materials. Let's take, for example, grass, and drop it here. Now we can press on delete or add, and we can add terrain with it or delete. We add with the right mouse button and delete with the left. So let's go to the center and create our first piece of terrain. To delete it, I just click on it with the left mouse button and it's deleted. Here we can see the terrain which has our material applied, and now we can toggle back this delete or add button. We won't need it right now. This radius parameter allows us to add several squares of terrain at once. For example, if I set it to 1, you can see that I am adding the center square and 1 to each side. So we add 9 squares at once. Here we see the height menu. We can move the terrain up or down. We can level the terrain. We can flatten it. We can average the terrain height. We can soften the terrain and add noise to the terrain. So let's, for example, add some mountains to the borders of our terrain. We press move the terrain up or down, and we get our brush. In the bottom right, we see the parameters for our brush. It can be circular or as a square. You can also toggle if its size is proportional to the distance from the camera. You can also change the size itself. I'm not sure why the brush clips into the terrain, but it doesn't really matter. We can change the speed at which the brush applies its changes, and we can soften the brush or harden it. We also have the slope and image settings here. We'll look at slope in a minute. For now, let's take a look at image. It allows us to paint with some image. For example, here we have a noise texture, so it will allow us to paint not just with a circle, but with noise. So let's try painting some mountains here. We move the terrain up with the right mouse button and down with the left. And here we see that we have some rather noisy mountains, so they're not just some circles. And to bring the terrain down, we can just use the left mouse button. Let's, for example, add a lake here. And here we have some hole in the terrain. If you'd like to add actual holes in the terrain, for example, to add caves, here is in the material tab, hole, and we just made a hole. It just cuts out a piece of the terrain. You can play around with other things here, but I won't for now, since there isn't much to explain there. And now we can go to material painting. For this we have this material menu here. To paint, we can drag a material into this menu and then select it with the left mouse button. And now, using the same brush parameters, we can, with the right mouse button, paint it onto the terrain. Let's say we'd like to paint the slopes of our mountains with stone material, so that the grass stays on top and the slopes are made of stone. For this, we'll use this slope parameter. It allows us to specify on which slope we paint the material. If you press it with the right mouse button, it will leave the values to the right of the cursor, and with the left to the left. So if I leave it like this, it'll paint only on the flat surfaces. So let's show it here. I'll paint the stone here, and we see that this material did not apply to this slope. And if I make it the other way around, it painted on the slopes, but left the grass in the flatter parts as just grass. So let's actually paint these mountains like this. It isn't too pretty, but it's not the point. Now let's make the bottom of a lake made from dirt, since generally there's not a lot of grass there, something like this. This color menu just allows you to apply some color to the materials if you like to give them some variety. While we are editing the terrain itself, let's check how we add water. We can have either lakes or rivers. Let's add place for our river, like this, and then back to water. We'll start with lake. First of all, we need to once again drop a material here. It will be used for our lake. To add a lake, we press this +1 button and we place points inside which our water will be drawn. Make sure that you add them clockwise, otherwise it won't work. So let's add some water here. We see that it doesn't really have the borders we need. We can move the points individually by selecting the point with the left mouse button and moving it with the right mouse button. We can also move all the points with this button, once again with the right mouse button, and we can move them vertically. So let's do this. Move it a bit down, something like this. And to this side we'll add a river. The water is already animated. You can also see these yellow borders here. It indicates our depth, so we can change the depth of the water. Right now, if we go to the bottom of our lake, we see that we are below our water and we don't have any water effects. If we go up a bit, we see that we are inside water. Let's add a bit of depth so that even at the bottom there is water. It's not necessary for this particular game, but it could be useful if you have, for example, swimming. Now let's go make a river. Here we once again add the points along which the river will flow, and here is our flowing river. Let's edit its depth as well. Here we can control points individually, like with the lake, and we can also make the river wider, and also let's move it down, something like this. I guess we need to move this particular point up a bit. Doesn't really matter right now. It's flowing like this. We have some other parameters here. The UV scale allows us to scale our texture into coordinates. To see how smoothness works, let's make one of the points higher than the others, and now apply a smoothness. We see that this part is now much smoother than without the smoothness. In the previous video I said that the water parameters would be much more visible when we add it to our world. So now that we've added it, let's look again at these water parameters. The smoothness changes how the reflections work. Our reflectivity also does this. You can see that a mountain there is reflected, and now it's not. Density and density base control how dense the water is. So density changes how much we see underwater, and density base is the base value of the density. Even if we have density at 0, but density base quite high, the water will still be dense. Refraction is how much the water distorts what is under it. So currently it doesn't, and now it fully distorts it. And refraction of reflection, here we have the reflection of our mountain. If we have it at 0, the reflection stays still, and at higher values it is completely distorted. Underwater surface color and underwater depth color control how the water looks when we are underwater. So currently we are close to the surface, and if we edit this color, it is how it looks. And let's move towards the depths. it becomes darker, and if we edit this color, we can make it brighter or maybe a different color completely, and it will interpolate between these two colors in the depths and on the surface. It's not visible from the outside, it's just for the moments when the camera is underwater. We can now start adding some objects. Here we can have the objects aligned to the height map or not aligned. We'll have it aligned since castles generally stand on the ground. And here is our castle. Looks fine to me. Let's also add the mage and the skeleton warrior. Now we can see what these controls do here. Object points just draw points where objects are. Physical bodies show the physical bodies, but we don't have any for now. Object boxes show the bounding boxes, and so on. We can also snap objects to the grid. For example, when I now try to move this wizard, the wizard aligns to the grid. We can change the size of the grid if we like. For now, I'll leave it out. Here we have our normal moving, rotating, scaling, and so on. What is parameters, we'll talk later. We can also see the list of our objects. There are several ways to sort, and here inside the terrain object class, we see all our free objects. Once again, we'll talk about object classes later. For now, it doesn't really matter. And also we can paint with objects, the same settings for the brush. And here we drag, for example, let's paint skeletons. We can set allowed materials and disallowed materials. So let's make it so that skeletons can only stand on stone. So now when we try to paint, we see that even if I brush here, the skeletons will not appear since allowed materials are only stone. To remove them, I'll just paint with the left mouse button. In the world editor, we also have the waypoint system, which is useful when, for example, you have some object that has to move in a preset path. For example, we have a guard around the castle. We can add some points, set the loop mode to loop, and we can see that we have a connected path. You can also smooth these lines. You can give the name and then access these waypoints from the code to move some character around. For now we won't do this, but maybe later. To delete them, once again press -1 and just delete these waypoints. The last thing we have here is the path section. It is for editing the path mesh. For some reason it's really flickering for me, but anyway, we have different settings for how the path mesh works, and we'll get back to it when we will work on our enemy's pathfinder. We can also see that currently our lighting is quite dull, it's not really pretty. So to fix this, we create a thing called an environment. Let's create it inside our world and open it. Now the sun is gone completely, but doesn't matter. First thing we want to do is to return our sun. We open the sun settings, and you should know that the sun won't appear and the trace won't appear until you add the image for this sun. That's why I've imported this sun image. We add it, and here's our sun. We have settings for glow, for its size. We can change its angle. We have image color, light color. For example, we can change the light to be more yellow, like it's evening. Here we also have the ambient color settings, which allows us to set the ambient color, the bloom settings, the clouds. I don't currently have cloud images, but if we edit them here, let's add the sun once again. They would scroll like this, and you can have several layers of clouds. I'll remove them for now. We can add fog, which can affect or not affect the sky. And we can also change its density and color. To disable any of these elements, we can just untick the boxes there. For example, to remove the sun, I just untick it, and there it's gone. And we can also edit the sky. The horizon color, let's make it red, and the sky a bit lighter, leave it like this. And here we have our environment. It's currently not applied to our world, so if I close it, it goes back to our dull default lighting. To apply it, we just drag it onto the world. And here it is applied. What's cool about the environments is that You can also preview different things with environments enabled. For example, we'd like to know how our mage will look with a certain environment. So I open the mage model and I also double click on the environment. And here is the mage in this environment. The same works with material. You can also see that the sky doesn't really look blue, although I set it to be blue. And this is because of certain video settings of the editor. So it's time to look at the video settings. These settings control how the editor renders what it does. So they don't affect how the game will look, but rather how we see what we edit inside the editor. For example, why is the sky not blue? It's because here in advanced video options, we have sky night light, which enables the blue filter for the sky, which can be useful if you, for example, work late at night, and you can even set the time at which it enables. During the day, the sky looks like this. I leave it on. You can also see a ton of settings here, for example, the diffuse modes, the color spaces, the full screen, the anti-aliasing, and the soft particles, and so on. There is a ton of settings, and they can be useful to either get better performance out of the editor without affecting how the game will look, or maybe preview some graphics options that you will enable in your game. For example, maybe I'm wondering how my game will look without shadows, and I don't want to recompile the whole project to see this. I'll just remove the shadows, and I see that it looks kind of bad, so we put it back. And maybe I want to check some shadow map sizes and so on. We can also scale the user interface here, and you can also change the skin of the user interface. For example, the neon skin looks like this, but I like the default dark skin better.